name is Greg Guldin. I am the Dean of Student Affairs at St. Andrews. In addition to that, I also am a dorm parent on Voorhees, like I said, which is sophomore founders residence, the head swim coach, and the co-advisor to the senior class. And so do some different things in different places, but excited to wear all those hats and get to know the kids in different lights. And I'm joined by Terrell Myers. Terrell?
Yes, my name is Terrell Myers. I've been at St. Andrews for, I'm going to say, in between 15 and 20 years. Uh, I currently work on Fleming uh, one night a week, Friday nights. I coach girls volleyball, varsity basketball, and I'm also kind of spearhead reach. I don't know if we'll get into reach a little bit. Is more of the transportation, so the interactions every day with students, comings and goings.
And so what we have been asked to do in this session is talk through kind of our marks conduct system, but I view it as more than that. So we're going to talk about what it is, how it works, what the students actually experience on their end. So if they ever say, I got marks for this, you actually know what that means. What we like to see from the students through the process and ultimately the result as they continue to accrue marks over time. So the first question is, what is the mark system and why do we have it? So the mark system is really designed to be a responsibility system. So it's a system where we are asking students to live in community with each other, which involves a layer of responsibility, and to take responsibility for themselves as a member of that community. So a lot of the things that students could quote unquote get marks for are showing up on time or not showing up on time, being present or not being present, cleaning up their rooms before breaks or on a daily or weekly basis, using their computers incorrectly during study hall, those kinds of things. And so everything that the students have is kind of all the marks are worth a different amount. And then faculty are able to say, okay, you were not to class on time, so you were late less than 5 minutes. That's quote unquote worth 1 mark. And the student will get one, and that's kind of how that works. Terrell, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it's hard when you're in the dean's office because as soon as you hear dean's office, you associate that with something bad. But I think we use the mark system, and we were talking earlier about the mark system just paints a portrait of their life here at St. Andrews. Um, and it gives us an understanding of, or it gives us an opportunity to coach them through their there's minor mistakes. They're minor like they're minor marks, right? So that's what is basically for it. We want to paint a picture so when we do have conversations, we have an idea what we're talking about.
Yeah, and I would say it's similar, again, the why behind us having it, it's similar to being the teacher in a class or the coach of a sport. We use the mark system as our way to coach the students on habits that are being identified on the marks side, right? So if you're showing up late to one class, one teacher might not know that. But if you're showing up late to class and to dorm check-in and to your practice each day, then the mark system would catch that. And then we can ultimately over time help coach the student in forming better habits to be on time or better habits of room cleanliness, things like that, like I said earlier. There are some more severe marks categories. The most you can earn at once is 5. That would be for disrespectful behavior. So disrespectful behavior has a little bit more of a sense of judgment to it, where the faculty member is saying, this really was something that took away from the community in a meaningful way. A student, an example of that this year may have been a student was encouraged to have a conversation with a faculty member when they did something, took something from the faculty member's class and didn't realize the impact that had on the faculty member. And so we advised the student to have a conversation with a faculty member, and a day went by, 2 days went by, 3 days went by, and we continued to encourage the student to have the conversation, and they said they would do it, and then a week went by and they hadn't. And so instead of continuing that, marks came in for disrespect because that was not demonstrating respect to the situation at hand. So that's kind of why we have the system. The how it works. So faculty members are really in the holders of the mark system. We've got Blackbaud, and they can go into Blackbaud, and effectively there's a drop-down menu, select whatever the item is, and then write a description, and then issue those marks. Some of them are automatic, so it will automatically trigger an email to the student saying these were the marks that you received. Some of them need to be approved by me and or Terrell before they go through, like those disrespect ones, because there's usually, like I said, an element of uh, there's just higher stakes there. We coach the faculty, we coach the students, that these should occur. Marks should never be given without a conversation. So we want students shouldn't just get an email, right? They get notified that they get those marks, but they should have a conversation with the faculty member. Hey, you were late to check in, or you were late to class, or you didn't clean your room. There are some that don't come with conversations, like breakfast check-in is a big one. Breakfast check-in occurs every day for the third through fifth formers, and it's at the same time. So if a student misses breakfast check-in, they would get 2 marks for that. And there's no conversation there. It's just kind of a process. Okay, you were present or you weren't present. And it's similar for academic lateness, where we have an attendance at the start of class. So that's kind of the how it works. If a student receives, am I missing anything, Terrell?
You're good.
Okay, and if I'm rambling, tell me. Um, and then finally, what we like to see in the process, if marks are coming through for a particular student, it's an opportunity for us to coach them on having conversations that they might not want to have, right? Okay, I was late to breakfast check-in. I know I showed up. I actually had my ID. Something must have happened. So how do I get that fixed? Well, we will absolutely. What we are trying to do with the students is keep the mark system very low stakes, because it's meant to reinforce habits of responsibility. So the thing we don't want students to think is, I'm getting marks, I'm a bad kid. That's not the point. That's not what we're doing. But because it's coming from the dean's office, students often associate it with punitive measures, right? But what we're really trying to do is say, okay, these are low stakes. It's not a big deal. There was an error on the system side. We're going to wipe those marks out. So we do encourage the kids to reach out to us for those quick ones via email, but for bigger ones, face to face, right? I had this moment on dorm with a faculty member. They thought that I was late, but I actually was doing this. I had a conversation, but that moment passed and nothing changed. What should I do next? And so we look at those as coaching conversations with the kids. Usually, my piece of advice to them is you usually need to have the conversations that you don't want to have. So if you don't know how to have that conversation, let's talk about that. Try to have it, and then if it doesn't work, come back and we'll go from there. So go ahead.
Normally, what happens is the students will come in, and we know that when they arrive to campus, there's an adjustment. Like every family's coming with different rules, right? But as St. Andrews is their house and is our house, we have our set of rules. So we know that there's going to be a time that they need to adjust. And I know it's really hard for them to have a conversation with an adult about Mark. So normally what happens is they'll come to my office and they'll want to have a conversation. But if I didn't give the marks, I suggest that they have the conversation with the person that gave them the mark. So I'll coach them through what's the best way to have that conversation and try to have them find their voice and be able to have that conversation. And I tell them all, we try to explain to them, even if you have that conversation, you may still not get what you want,
Mhm.
right? But that's the idea. And then what you'll notice halfway through the year, they'll feel more comfortable having those conversations.
And adding on to that, I think what we also find is usually, I would say it's more difficult for third and fourth formers, but by the time kids get to the fifth form year and they've gotten used to the ebbs and flows a little bit more, when a student gets marks or when something they've done, they will actually talk themselves into it. They don't necessarily need, if they're coming to us to discern if something needs to change, then it probably does need to change, to be honest, because our students get really good at no, I was late and that I shouldn't have been late. So that makes sense. I should get the mark, right? And ultimately what we say to them is getting 1 mark is not a big deal. Getting 2 marks is not a big deal. They have wiggle room in, even if you want to use your marks, go for it, right? If you don't want to show up to 9 breakfast check-ins, go for it, because at that point, nothing is really going to happen. Your advisor gets their advisor gets emails every time they get marks, as does their dorm team. So the dorm teams and the advisors can kind of coach them, hey, why are you not going to breakfast check-in? Those kinds of things. But what happens what the response is, and that's kind of the outcome at some point. There are two things that happen as students accrue marks. The first one would be at 20 marks overall, they get a Sunday work detail. And what that really means is, okay, we are going, the consequence for having not demonstrating all of those habits that we want you to demonstrate is 2 hours of something. That something depends on the weekend. It depends on the time. What we're ultimately doing. Sometimes it could be raking leaves because it's in the fall. Sometimes it could be helping clean the vehicles. Ultimately, it's something that needs to get done on campus, that we tend to when we have the extra help to get it done. And so that's what we do with work detail. If a student continues to go beyond 20 to 30, that's when we actually have a formal coaching conversation with me or Terrell, which we call a residential review. So we would sit with the student and their advisor and actually start the conversation with, what are the patterns that are coming up here? How did we get to these patterns developing, and what can we do to address those patterns moving forward? So that's kind of the process from beginning to end. The residential review is a 30-mark thing. So far this year, to give you context, if that's helpful, we've had 2 residential reviews for students, and the marks reset every academic quarter. So every quarter they'll go back to 0, and the whole process starts again. I would be remiss if I didn't say the kids can gamify the system. It's a points-based system, so they can try to gamify it. They're kids. That's what they do. That's what we expect. And we try to push back on that, and make sure they know where the boundaries are. The mark system is not foolproof. We know that students are not getting marks for everything they're doing. We know that students are, that the mark system is people dependent, right? It's faculty who are ultimately in all these moments discerning how to give marks, which we coach faculty how to, but any system based on humans has human error. So it's not perfect, and we recognize that. But I think it's a good way for us to, what I also know is psychology tells us that kids need boundaries, right? And the mark system at St. Andrews has proven over time to be a strong enough boundary for where the kids day to day know what's okay and where they need to be responsible, and what's not okay. And so it's not perfect, but it does help us in coaching the kids to be more responsible and better members of the community. That's kind of my thought on it. Terrell, do you have anything else?
No, just the idea that they have 24 hours if they want to have a conversation. If they have marks that they think they don't deserve, we give them 24 hours to come down and kind of appeal the marks. And as Greg said, they like to gamify it. Because what happens is as they get closer to 20
Mhm.
and the term ends, then they want to try to get marks removed because they don't want work detail. Um, but so we try to give them within 24 hours to come and have that conversation.
Yeah, it's actually 48. We give them a
Mhm.
little bit more time, so the 48 hours, but it was to Terrell's point, we had students who would always say at 19 come to us and say, "Oh, remember that time 4 weeks ago when I said this?" And at that point, the muscle memory is lost. So we are trying to encourage things to happen more presently, for sure.